well, the only way you can be a true, good, consistent non-Calvinist is to be like the open theist and just think that God's gaining knowledge as the world goes along.
What does that mean from our limited human perspective? Because we've got to understand, we can only see the fruit. God can see the root. Now, I know that's just a pithy little statement, but it's really true, and you're going to hear me come back to it several times in this discussion, because it really gets to the root of the difference between our semantical, I think, the way in which we're looking at this. So we're looking at this from God's perspective. God sees the eternal. God sees what's happening in the entire person's life. He has the entire life in view when he makes his judgments, okay? He sees it all. And therefore, it's almost like if you were to use, illustrations all fall short, so please don't nitpick my illustration here, but if you were watching a movie that you had already read the book for example, you had read The Lord of the Rings, and now you're watching The Hobbit or one of the sequels. And so you know the story that's going to play out. You know where Gollum ends up. You know how it ends up happening. And so when you're watching that story, you're watching somebody who's seemingly good in one part of the movie, but you know the final outcome. You know where that person's intentions are. You know where that person ends up. And therefore, you're skeptical, and you would never declare, hey, that's a good person. Why? Because, well, you know the end of the story. You know that person's life. And in the same way, God knows when he makes his judgments, when he makes his declarations, he's knowing the intentions of the heart.
And this is why you either have God knowing what he knows because he determined it from within himself, or you have God knowing what he knows because he learned it from something outside of himself. And free will, logically speaking, if you think about it, is a view which says that there are aspects of God's knowledge which are in fact determined by you and not by him. And therefore, it makes no logical sense to say that you're existing only in the mind of God prior to creation, and yet you're not, and yet you're still somehow also determining his thoughts, right? This is just, once again, a very logically inconsistent view. And my position is the one that starts with God, says he knows all things inherently because he determined them from within himself when only he existed. I'm the one that gets to say God knows it inherently and justify it. You're the one that has the trouble of justifying a view where you don't like the word learning, but aspects of his knowledge are determined and made up by things that he's not determining, that are from outside of himself, and you have a very steep hill to climb, logically speaking. Calvinists often like to talk about God as the divine author. And we give the author example. When you're going to author a story, every aspect of that story is going to be thought up by you. You're starting with you, and you plan and purpose and determine everything about the story, including characters, including what they do, why they do what they do, all the way down the line. You're the one that has a purpose in it all. And it doesn't make any logical sense for you to be considering what your characters will do apart from your plans to make them and your reasons for making them and why they will do what they do. You're the one, as the author, who plans that and determines that. And so as far as this idea of determining or learning, again, there's no third option.